All right, now we come to, we've been talking about earthenware. Now we come to stoneware. Now remember that earthenware is fired at approximately 1800 degrees, various temperatures up to 18. It could start down at about, I'd say Indians were firing their pottery, that's early American Indian, is firing their pottery at about 1200 degrees. Now what they would do is they would make their pots out of just natural clay, usually red clay. If it had the properties that would make it stick together, the stickiness of clay, it had to be sticky. Anyway, they would make them, and they didn't have any kilns, so what they would do is pile brush and weeds over it. The reason we know this is because we find shards, that's a piece of broken pottery, of Indians, and those shards will have designs by that burnt weeds and grasses and small limbs on it. Now it wasn't heavy enough to do anything to the pottery. The reason in weeds and stuff, they were light enough that they could build a big bonfire over that pottery, and they would burn it. And they just keep burning and adding to it, and it would get hotter and hotter and hotter. But actually, you can take out your pocket knife on most early Indian pottery, and you could cut it. It would become more the consistency of, say, soapstone. But anyway, these, it went from like 1200, and after we got electric kilns, we'd take it on up to 1800. Most brick companies fire theirs at around 1800, maybe 19, even 20. It's according to the color of the clay they wanted. And they would do such things as cut off when they would be firing brick, they'd get the kiln so hot, then they would cut off the supply of oxygen. That's called a reduction firing. What happens when they cut off the source of the oxygen for the fire or the flame in there, if it's a gas kiln, what it does is the kiln itself, if there's any hole in that kiln at all, the flames will lash out there like tongues. They will run out maybe 6 or 8 feet trying to suck in oxygen to get oxygen to feed themselves, kind of. It becomes like a roaring beast. It makes this sound like a freight train coming. It's a scary thing to be firing things up to 2400 degrees. This was fired at that temperature. Now, anything, I would say that they would be a range from anywhere from like 2000 degrees up to 2500 roughly is in stoneware temperature. If you go above that, you get into China, which is a special clay, and it's done quite thin, and there's a lot of breakage to it. That's what makes it expensive. And like I said before, it becomes somewhat translucent. But let me say that all that underglaze was going to be, what I wanted to do was to combine an underglaze painting. Instead of putting a thin coat of clear on there, and clear, by the way, anything, most of that would have burnt off anyway. But that was my problem. I had a lot of color on this one. This fella just happened to be sitting by me, and I said, his name was Frank, and he was working on his master's degree, and this is when I kind of first started. I said, Frank, how about just sitting still and let me paint you portrait on this pot? He said, Oh, that's, wow, Hilton, you can't paint portraits on pottery. Well, anyway, they hadn't tried it. It wasn't for, I'm sure somebody's tried something because there's nothing new on the face of the earth, but they hadn't seen anything like it. And they didn't think you could do it, mainly because it burned off the color. And as you can see, this spotty blue places, that stayed. And there will be other little bitty dabs of color around, but I thought that's not the greatest in the world. However, it looks pretty old and it doesn't look bad. But they didn't have up until I went to that particular school, which is East Tennessee State, they never had anybody that could paint. They didn't have a painter that was going to major in ceramics before. Nobody could paint a portrait in class, or they hadn't, weren't used to it. So I decided to make that my thesis, how to do this, put this, and what and wouldn't burn completely off. So I did a study on the underglazes and found out and made a list of the ones that would survive a temperature of 2,400 degrees. And I did that, and with charts and all. And if a person looked it up, you're just wasting your time using anything but the colors I suggested, because I did endless trials with little bars of different colors and stuff, and I can tell you what temperature that the color leaves that pot. It will not survive that heat. Some of them start losing it at maybe 1,800 degrees, some at 2,200, but I generally picked on about a 2,400 because I'm up there in the stoneware range. Let me show you the bottom of it, and now you've been seeing pots before, and they were just kind of buff colored. As you can see, this one, it has my name on the bottom, D. Hilton, 1969. And it looks like stone. It looks like a rock here. And that's where some glaze has dripped down, which it's often done, and I've ground that off on an emery wheel, on power bench grinder. But anyway, so it's set level. But that's kind of a common occurrence that you have to do that. Sometimes it'll puddle here and run over the edge. By the way, that's called the foot. This part of the pot is called the lip. Now, this one has a handle on it. Of course, a glaze. This is just a brown glaze. And I did put a clear glaze here because you can see it's got glossier. Generally, the stoneware glazes are not that glossy. They look more like leather. But this one up here is kind of glossy at the top, that particular glaze. But this was a clear glaze that I mixed and put on that pot. And it bubbled, and there's some flaws in it. But here's a different sort of handle that I pulled. And it ended up, this is kind of the standard way. You'd score it and then pull the handle and get the shape you wanted, the length and stuff. And this one starts up here and comes back down through there. And you want to have that negative shape, which is, negative means nothing, that is a hole through something. It's a shape that you want to kind of go with the pottery. You wouldn't want it bulging out there into a round shape because your pottery is not like a ball. It's kind of tall and stuff. I thought that goes pretty well, the negative shape. There's considerations to everything, but I carved a little bit of a design up here and picked up with a little carved design down here at the bottom. But mainly I was interested, the first one I tried doing underglaze. And I'll show you some other things I did, but that's what I did my study on, what could survive it and what couldn't.